The Rebel Capitalist Show.
All right, guys, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to bring someone to the Rebel Capitalist Show that I just had the opportunity to meet face-to-face at the Bitcoin conference, but I have really been looking forward to speaking to this gentleman for a long, long time. His name is Jeff Booth. Jeff, welcome to the Rebel Capitalist Show.
Thanks for having me, by the way, George, and the feeling's mutual.
Hey, so can you start off for my viewers who might not know your backstory and then your book that's just wildly popular? Can you walk us through that first?
Sure. You know, and I'm going to simplify the backstory. I'm a technology entrepreneur, have been all my life, built some successful technology companies. Still today, I'm on the board of 7 different technology companies. So from that lens, I have a front seat view of how fast technology is changing the world in which we live. Mm-hmm. And just like an entrepreneur kind of looks at a problem and then says it's a system problem and creates a business out of a problem, essentially to deliver more value.
Right.
What I realized that overall in the world, in the meta lens of the world, we had a system problem, and the system was technology was a stronger force than monetary policy could be. You had 2 different systems: an inflationary monetary policy colliding against technology, and technology was going to win. And the fight would have disastrous consequences to our world. So I wrote a book. I didn't want to write the book. I wrote the book called The Price of Tomorrow: Why Deflation is Key to an Abundant Future. Really for my kids, because right. I realized what would happen as a result of this, and then all of COVID accelerated these trends, and all of what you're seeing is it's reading like a playbook for what's happening in the world today.
Okay, so for the people who are just kind of maybe hearing this and saying, okay, well, I saw M2 money supply go up by 25% in 2020. I'm seeing the prices of everything go up. How does that correlate with the book you wrote? How does that fit in to the overall big picture?
So technology creates a staggering amount of efficiency, mm-hmm. And that efficiency is deflationary. We use technology to save our time, and so the only way to stop that but that has a real profound outcome for the existing system that we've created, because the existing system is created on credit and debt. Mm-hmm. And if you allow deflation, the entire thing unwinds to the ground. So governments are in a desperate fight all over the world to stop technological deflation from happening. And as a result of that fight, they have to concentrate all power in the state. That's what's happening. And all of what people are noticing, and all of what's happening, and you do some really great podcasts on whiteboards and everything else. All of the measurements that we're using for that we're measuring the system by the system. And so most people are trapped in they think housing prices go up forever, because in the last 20 years we've created $185 trillion of easing.
Right.
And so their house prices go up against that. But so we've lost the plot on what's actually really happening, and every economic calculation as a result of losing that plot is broken, but we still measure that system by the system
in nominal terms.
Exactly.
So they have a very difficult time seeing things in real terms, and I hear that all the time. You know, you always hear the story of one of your buddies that says, oh my gosh, my grandmother bought this house in 1950 for $20,000, and boy, I wish I could go back in time and buy 100 houses just like that. Right. And then you sit there and do the math, and you adjust for inflation, or probably the real rate of inflation, and it's probably worth $15,000.
Exactly.
As far as purchasing power, yeah, people really struggle with that. So why is deflation a good thing? And this is another thing that I think people really get caught up on, especially the Keynesians when they listen to them, because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when I think of deflation, I see it as 2 different types. There's one type of deflation that decreases overall demand. And that's what the Keynesians are afraid of. And unfortunately, our system is built on debt and all of this, monetary heroin that you're referring to earlier. So we have to have that increase in the money supply. We almost have to have that type of inflation. But there's another type of deflation that if we had an actual free market, that we would have as a result of productivity. And a lot of times people can, especially Keynesian economists, they conflate the two as though they're one and the same. Can you explain that?
You just nailed that. So people, when they hear Great Depression, they don't want another Great Depression, and it's burned into the psyche of people. And so they conflate what caused the Great Depression, a buildup of debt that couldn't be repaid, to the Great Depression itself. And we have the same thing happening today. It's impossible to pay back the debt, so governments are monetizing the debt to try to pretend to pay it back with cheaper dollars tomorrow. Mm-hmm. That inflation is, and the inflation that they're creating as a result is polarizing society, and it will get worse. And it is against the natural force in a free market. And when you say good deflation, bad deflation, people have a hard time grappling with that. But if you think, just what does technology do? It saves your time. We could instead of dig holes with excavators, we could dig holes with spoons.
Milton Friedman.
Right.
Milton
Friedman. And so people believe that the economy must have inflation to be productive, and it's exactly the opposite. It's exactly the opposite. But we live in that system, and it's a belief set. There's no physics rule that says inflation must be there to have a productive society. Productivity gains are most naturally distributed to all if you allow deflation to happen, because the free market drives price down. And when you're working on technology which is moving exponentially, and remember, most of the gains from that productivity are in front of us, not behind us. So if it took over the last 20 years, and actually now it's way a higher number, essentially $185 trillion of debt to be able to concentrate the gains to very few people out of what would naturally occur in a free market.
Right.
That has to, we're on two almost compounding feedback loops. One deflationary. So what will happen? Governments are trying to raise prices on everything. As a consequence of that, any free market, any CEO must bring technology into their business to reduce labor faster. Mm-hmm. And you're on two different set, which must make the government print more money to try to solve that, which makes prices go up, which divides society. You're on two polar opposite, essentially, systems competing against each other, and the consequences are really predictable all over the world. So you see signposts everywhere.
Here's kind of an outside of the box question that I just thought of. Do you think that our economy, because I always see our economy as being way over financialized, and it's like this hot air balloon, where in my opinion, the hot air balloon should be the real economy, the production of goods and services, and then the financial economy is the basket. And I think we got it in reverse order. Do you think that the need for this constant inflation to basically bail out the government is perpetuating the financialization of the economy?
Exactly. Okay. So when you're saying some of this type of thing, George, you're actually you're doing the same thing. You're looking at a symptom of the root cause, and you're talking about the symptom being the financialization, when it's a natural byproduct of two different systems operating.
Right. Yeah. Because what's going to happen is people can't hold dollars. So it turns us all into speculators because we can't save money or quote unquote dollars. Because if we do, we lose the purchasing power. Jeff, I'd like to get your take on this real quick. I tried to make this, tell a story to make this really easy. And I went back and looked at, I believe it was a time just post Civil War, before they started the Fed. In like 1912, 1913. And I looked at the average rate of inflation or deflation. And obviously back then the numbers are really hard to come by. They're kind of, you gotta piece them together. It's like Braille, but it looked like there was about 2 to 3% deflation consumer
Yeah.
price deflation. And I know from 1800 to 1900, prices went down by 50%. You know, so anyway, I took about a 20-year time span there and said, okay, well, if prices went down by 2 or 3%, I looked at nominal wages and tried to piece them together. Looks like nominal wages actually went up at the same time, you know, by about 1%. And so I did this thought experiment of a McDonald's worker today. You know, if they started using today's prices, let's say they're making $1,500 a month, and that can just pay their bills. So at the end of the month, they have nothing left over. But over the next 20 years, we had a 1% nominal increase in their wages compounded. And then we had a 2 or 3% deflation in the costs of what they buy monthly compounded. At the end of that 20 years, it was something like their wages go up to $1,800, but the prices of the stuff that they buy goes down to $800. So they're left with a net $1,000 per month.
Yep. And all of those, so that's looking back. And if you look at the Great Deflation, right, actually in kind of the setup for a US being a free market and the innovation that came from that, it actually came on a hard money Declaration of Independence and everything else that caused productive society to actually generate wealth for all Americans. That was that. So it's actually ironic that US has lost its way and the world has lost its way on what created that created that power, created individual rights and freedoms from that power. And so if now pull on that thread a little bit, because we're all living in a system that's doing the exact opposite, so we can't see it. Right. And then we'll listen to the news and we can't see it, and they're all repeating the same thing. And people actually believe that inflation is required today for society to function. And I'd ask this, it's a really simple concept. In our lives, our rational choices, we try to get more value for less all the time. Mm-hmm. Every one of our rational choices, we want more for less. How can you have an entire economy where every individual actor in that economy is trying to get more for less and have a system designed the exact opposite way?
Yeah. And producer trying to produce more for less.
But they have to because citizens demand it. Yeah, right. Google isn't a monopoly, or Amazon isn't a monopoly as big as it is unless they were giving value to people.
Right.
And when you're printing money against that, you make those monopolies bigger as a result. So every single rational actor is making their best choice in an economy that we have misinformation and money. So you must have misinformation everywhere else.
Yeah. So we have these two tectonic plates. Yeah. They're battling each other all the time. You have the prices of stuff wanting to go down because these entrepreneurs are producing things more efficiently with technology. And then the other tectonic plate of the government or the Fed, or however you want to look at it, trying to create more and more dollars circulating to chase those goods and services to make prices go up so that they can spend more money and pay it back with devalued dollars.
And then you get a whole bunch of people in that narrative talking about hyperinflation. And then just like in 2008, there'd be hyperinflation, but technology actually drops the prices more. And that's that same thing happening. A whole bunch of people are getting suckered into thinking there's hyperinflation, and there won't. I don't believe there will be, because technology will have a corresponding effect of having to drive labor down and drive labor out, which will cause more printing, but it'll actually give the governments more room to print, because they're saying because we're focused on we're talking about the wrong things.
Right.
It's a completely different system. And this is actually why I wrote the book, because I'm a technology entrepreneur. It's driving me crazy that people couldn't put the two and two together. They're two totally different systems. And everything I do tries to give people more value for less.
Right.
So you would think that if a lot of people were doing that same thing, and we were and the only way I could possibly create a winning business is if I achieve that.
That's right. So maybe a good question to ask to really paint the picture would be, if we had no monetary inflation, let's say since Volcker, right, since 1981, if the amount of dollars were the same in the system as we had back then, what do you think the prices of things, of stuff would be today in America.
It would be so. Now remember, this whole system, the banking system, everything else would have probably collapsed because it was built on, because you didn't have anything backing it. You had a credit-based system backing it. So if you allowed that to continue to happen, it would have reset at some point anyways, and there would have been national bailouts of banks and everything else. So that's specific. That's actually why it's important to talk about structural and the energy. As an entrepreneur, here's what I think about, and I'm going to answer your question, but as an entrepreneur, here's what I think about. Once I understand a structure of something and why one has to fail and where the market's going, I want all my energy in providing the best path to the future.
Right.
100% of my energy, not talking about the past, is best path for the future. So today we have two different systems. One, I am absolutely convinced, and nothing has proven me wrong since I wrote the book, that we will have a system that will you must have a currency that allows for deflation, or all power is concentrated in the state, and that on that path, it's likely war and revolution on the way through. So you must have a currency that's, I believe, digitally native and allows for deflation. It's a requirement for where we're moving on technology. But by the way, the prices in the free market would astound people.
Yeah.
And it would be so nuts. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. First, starting at the highest order. We don't pay for the oxygen we breathe because it's abundant. Technology creates abundant, and if it was, we can pay for it underwater where it's scarce. And so, but people conflate economics with, they think economics is built around value. It's built around scarcity.
Yeah, right.
And so technology gives us more for less everywhere. And now let's use an example. I used to spend $19.95 per CD. And the entire industry was around people who could choose which musicians were going to get to see me, which ones I were going to. So I saw a tiny fraction of the amount of total music, and it cost me a whole pile for the entire distribution channel, jobs, everything else. And now it was just information, but it was information packaged as things. And now that information is widely available, and $9.95 a month. I have unlimited music, and there's a whole bunch of new stars in the world that would have never been found in the other system. Abundance, and abundance creates a cascading price that falls over and over and over again. The same thing is true in our photos. We use them. Look at every app on your phone. It's free. And it's free because there's a race down in price as you create more and more abundance. And that's coming everywhere in our life. The only reason we don't believe it's coming everywhere in our lives is because we're living in a system that's making that not true.
Right. Do you think that things that are more tangible would have had the same percentage price? Like, what about oil, though? Like, what about energy, oil?
Okay, perfect example. Today in Canada, last year at this time, our gas prices were 89 cents a liter. Today they're $1.69. Are they $1.69 because of supply and demand, or are they $1.69 because we printed a whole bunch of money to make them go up? They're $1.69 because we printed. So energy, that entire energy infrastructure is a really good debate. So the energy is, today we have net new energy coming on at lower cost than any other energy, right? And that energy, what you would say is clean, green. Some of that is clean, green. We might not be all the way there on a transition yet, but more and more so. Solar is getting cheaper by 11% per year. So it's becoming more and more of our overall energy and infrastructure, starting from a really small amount. And it's getting cheaper and becoming more and more. So storage and everything else in that. So and then energy is every other thing we buy is a function of energy. So if that's becoming cheaper and going forward, and every other thing we buy is compounded on top of that, that must mean more deflation in front of us. Which means,
without the monetary stimulus,
which means prices are falling, we get more for less everywhere, which means Government has to exponentially increase monetary easing to stop that,
Right.
to stop the transition to green.
Right.
Right. And so I find it almost, these are crazy town conversations that people talk about Bitcoin mining being bad for the environment when it's the only thing that can fix this.
Yeah. We'll talk about sound money. I mean, obviously the conversation goes to Bitcoin. So, the main thing, well, not the main thing, but the first question I'd have with Bitcoin is it's limited, but we can lend it on a fractional reserve basis, because you had gold as base money. If you have Bitcoin as base money, it's fractional reserve. How do you get the best of both worlds, in the sense that you have sound money, but at the same time you have a money that can actually expand, that's elastic, as Jeff Snider would say, so you can facilitate maximum growth?
So because Bitcoin, it doesn't just have 21 million units, people will get, it's divisible by 100 million units. You have lots of expansion room. But let's say you want to fractionalize that on top of that. Let's say an economy is needed. I don't believe it is where we're going, by the way. I believe the exact opposite. I believe because of where technology is driving to, things get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So I don't believe it's needed. But let's just play that forward and say it is. If you fractionalize it, then the people that lever up against that, it's just a free market works. They lose everything. That's the only difference. So if something fails, it fails. And so today, when something fails, it doesn't fail. You print more money.
Right.
That's the only difference.
Yeah. So we go back to a system of almost like free banking, if you will, that we had in the early mid 1800s, prior to the Civil War.
That's right.
Yeah. That's exactly how I see it in my mind too. But whenever I think of it being divisible, the dollar is divisible, obviously. So you can divide it into pennies or dimes. But then I think back to Bretton Woods, 1944, and I'm like, the dollar was divisible, but we still got the Eurodollar system as a result of the countries, the global economy not having enough dollars, and the United States couldn't run large enough trade deficits to get those dollars out circulating. Therefore, they came up with this Eurodollar system. That's why I understand it's divisible. The dollar is divisible, but yet we still got the fractional reserve lending, and then we still got the Eurodollar system. That's why I kind of, the probabilities I see moving that direction, even with Bitcoin as base money. That makes sense?
It does, but I think, again, some of those things, again, we're different time periods, different markets, different technology. But let's use that and talk about the Triffin dilemma and such in that. One of the reasons you have that is because governments wouldn't allow their labor prices to increase to be able to, because normally what would happen is, let's say China, US today. China's labor price would rise, US labor prices would fall, and the Triffin dilemma would be solved by that natural order of global economies in cooperation with a free market. What caused a lot of the things you're talking about is if your GDP is over leveraged to consumer, or over leveraged on the opposite side. No, I'm not talking good or evil here. I'm talking about just the structure of your GDP is over leveraged to manufacturing. Then it's really hard on governments to say, we're going to allow manufacturing to fail while prices go up. It's easier just to say, we're going to destroy your currency so labor remains cheaper.
Yeah, right.
And
then you have the opposite problem in the economy that was consuming.
Problem. It's a zero-sum game all around the world. So all of these things have to net out at zero. There has to be buyers for sellers. And so it's a manipulation of that. And we're all confused because we're living in that manipulation.
Right. So going back to those tectonic plates that we were referring to, I'm sure everyone is saying, okay, well, how does this play out? I get how we got here.
Yeah.
I understand what Jeff is saying. I get it about deflation and productivity and the Fed and the government having to create all these extra dollars or currency units of fiat currency to try to battle it. But where do we go? I mean, do we go into this deflationary spiral where, and then if we do, does that mean asset prices or does that mean consumer prices? Does that mean the dollar gets stronger, or do we go into inflation? And if so, how do we, move around those different compartments of asset prices, consumer prices, and the dollar against other fiat currencies? And then maybe like short-term, mid-term, long-term.
Okay. So for me, again, coming back to the principle, I'm talking about a long-term cycle that is unstoppable. And what I'm talking about is what I want for my children to grow up in, a future that I want them to grow up in, and that's why I wrote the book. Now, in something that's falling down like this, and has to be manipulated, and so if there's misinformation money, there's misinformation everywhere else. So most people are consuming the world through that misinformation.
Right.
And that is bound to get worse. So and when I say worse, let's use first. I'm Powell and everything else, and I signal to the world that I'm going to stop printing. Deflationary depression, right? And I have to, if I let it go on for too long, if I let the natural force of the market go on for too long, it just keeps on unwinding. And I have to go in and bail out all my banks. So
do you think consumer prices goes down as well, or just asset prices?
Everything.
Okay.
Everything. Over time, they just keep on falling, and essentially the counterparty risk of all the entire bond market and everything else just keeps on failing. Mm-hmm. Every bank is built on top of that. Every institution is built up of that. Our way of life is built on top of that. So do I expect that to happen? And by the way, it doesn't matter if it happens in the US or Euro or Japan or everything else. That's what they're fighting against. And so you can expect some head fakes. Oh, we're going to tighten, quantitative tightening, and then you could expect the market to react violently. Right. You're talking short, medium term, violently, and then come in with more easing. But the die is set. There's nothing that the existing system can do to stop what we're talking about. In 2019, if you taxed 100% of all the profits of all U.S. companies, it's $2.25 trillion.
Right.
There's nothing in taxes you can do. There's nothing. You have a structural problem that cannot be solved. Period. So expect more printing, expect more everything else, and that path. Now, what is the consequence of that? So the consequence is likely not hyperinflation, because every other government is doing the same thing. And so every other government is doing the same
in fiat currency. But do you think maybe in consumer goods and services?
Potentially.
Right.
But at the same time, free market is moving faster and faster the other way on technology rails. Right. And we're all making rational choices on those technology rails. So we're concentrating power in the monopolies of technology companies at the same time, and we're making that happen faster and as a result. So what that means is, let's use housing or real estate as an example. The government pushes up real estate prices as a byproduct of their printing. Rents go up as a result. A whole bunch of people that cannot pay their food or housing or anything else expenses anymore go back to the same government that created it, whether it's Republicans, Democrats, doesn't matter. This is an apolitical conversation. It's a structural say, solve my problem and give me more money. And where does that money come from? It comes from picking your other pocket and making it worse and expanding government as a byproduct. So that leads along that entire path. It leads in centralization, completely state-run control. Mm-hmm. And along that axis somewhere, a lot of times there's revolution, war on the way there. And then when I'll get into that in a second, but it has to lead into complete state control.
Why is that, Jeff? Just to make sure we're connecting the dots there for the viewer.
Because you push prices up and more of the population doesn't have things.
Right.
And so they turn to socialism. They think the problem is capitalism. The problem is actually crony capitalism. And the problem. So they think the problem is a free market, and the problem is exactly the opposite of a free market. The problem is caused by government distorting a free market, but that's not what most people will hear. And again, if you actually understand most people, if you're living in some, or you talked about the McDonald's worker, if you're living something and you can't pay your bills and prices just went up, or your medical expenses or something like that, you'll listen to anybody who says it's that those people created it. I'll give you more money.
Yeah. And it's interesting that the solution is more money, not the solution is never more goods and services.
Exactly.
Like it should be.
Exactly. And so the die is already cast all around the world on this centralization, state control, and it'll accelerate, unfortunately.
Which means more social unrest.
And more people will turn to the same government to be able to do that. Because let's do a thought experiment today on what you talk about a lot on a lot of your different whiteboards and everything else. And let's say that governments face this truth because it's a fact. Everything I'm saying today is true. And face this truth and says, okay, we're going to stop. The entire system collapses.
Right.
And in that chaos, it's reborn. But no government will do that. So system change, like this system change that we're going through, requires, just like a business never does what they need to do to stop what's coming. Blockbuster adds candy aisles to their store instead of seeing Netflix provides differentiated economic value that I can't compete with out of my store. Kodak, who invented the digital camera, doesn't capitalize on any of the abundance that comes from the digital camera because it destroys their business. And so change is always forced onto a system from the outside. And there probably is too much kind of in Bitcoin when some of the toxicity and everything else that ends up happening in Bitcoin. But if you actually just a hope for a better future and everything else, that's the change that actually Bitcoin is driving. That's actually why I'm in Bitcoin,
right?
Because I think it's actually I think it's it's probably the only. I've looked everywhere you can imagine, every different type of system reset, how you could do this, how you could transition systems. I've done a lot of work on this path, and I've come to the conclusion that it's only Bitcoin that could provide a path to, and it's going to be messy no matter what,
right?
But a path to where we're going in a technology-driven society.
So we talk about the network effect, and I hear that as an argument why nothing can compete with Bitcoin because of Bitcoin's network effect that it already has, the head start. How does the Bitcoin network compete with the dollar network, which, as you know, is 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times bigger than the Bitcoin network? I heard you talk to Preston, and I don't think you guys discussed this, but is it because Bitcoin is 10x better, and that's kind of the magic number, and therefore it'll take this bottoms up approach? It won't happen overnight, but because it's superiority, it will at some point in time, it will take over that dollar network. Or in my mind, I always see it as the dollar has to fail in order for Bitcoin to win, because if the dollar just stayed as it is right now, then it would be very tough for that Bitcoin network to take it over.
So let's talk about a couple of, like, instead of just binary, right? A couple of what is going to happen. So on the centralization path, you're going to have more of this kind of misinformation, more printing, because it's structural. It has to be required.
Right. Yep.
And then more people are going to understand Bitcoin because of that. So the more these two systems diverge, more people are going to move to the other system. Now, at some point, you're going to have governments having like requirement to do central bank digital currencies,
right?
Because it's the only possible path that they could actually control you more.
And control the rate of inflation.
Exactly, and control, or pick the pocket of some people and pass it to others more.
Yeah, right.
So you're actually moving into really dystopian state control and think about state control in the past versus what we're moving into with artificial intelligence and robotics. It'll look very different, very different. Right. So, but that's a requirement. On the path through there, you might get governments combining together and saying, okay, we're going to put Bitcoin as one of the basket of goods, one of the basket of currencies, and we're going to peg to that. Might.
Like a Bretton Woods.
Right, well, like a Bretton Woods. I don't believe they'll be able to do that fast enough, because the cooperation that would be required to be able to do that would be too hard. But you might get something like that. You might get a whole bunch of governments trying to get back on gold to be able to try to create the chaos, stop the chaos. But the cooperation needed to try to turn an inflationary environment to a deflationary one would be almost, it's almost impossible to do from the existing system. I'd say it's impossible to do from the existing system.
Right.
And so what's happening is Bitcoin, as more and more people are starting to understand this, the network effect is one of the things. But because it's a network effect at the protocol level, so it's a TCP/IP, right? It's like investing in Bitcoin is like being able to be an investor in the internet itself. The second layer on top of that, Lightning and all of the other things that are happening on top of that, is where a lot of the other action happens, like the Amazons that were built on top of the Google, that were built on top of the primary protocol level. So that's what Bitcoin is. And you have a network effect. Essentially, the free market has come to for money. And you have a network effect happening on Bitcoin, and a network effect happening on a level above that, the second layer. So where a whole bunch of innovation is happening. It's still really early. It's still really early. But but what I would look at is in 1995 and 1997 and 1999, most of what people experience as the internet today didn't exist. Right? So the internet as we know it was 1989. But in 1997, it took 2 weeks to download a cat video.
Right.
And so people mistake what's coming on this network effect and the innovation and the rate of innovation and what's happening. We have a bias. We have a natural bias for short term. We have a bias for what's happening right now, and we project that trend forward.
Yeah, or that recency bias, right?
The recency bias, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're saying the same thing there, that the dollar network is going to lose because it has to fail because of the government's need to continue doing what they're doing. Dare I say, at an exponential rate. You know, we were talking about technology going up exponentially, therefore the money printing and the Orwellian central planning has to go up at a exponential rate as well, which drives people towards an alternative, and the best alternative out there being Bitcoin, especially when you consider the base layer and the secondary layer, the network effects of those, and it being 10x superior to the system that we have now. Is that
yeah, and then let's talk about altcoins for a second on that too.
Okay.
So when I talk about 10x, kind of what creates a chance for a competitor to emerge if they don't have a 10x advantage over an existing market, they almost have no chance, because to be seen, you need to have a crazy value to people to be able to overcome the marketing monopoly. That doesn't guarantee success, but it gives a much higher probability of success. But typically what that 10x is in a really tiny part of a sub-market. It's not in everything. So if you looked at the overall market of the US currency and all the regions and everything that's built on top of it, that's a giant market. And Bitcoin at the start, you could say, competed against gold, right, as a store of value. What's happening on top of that is, so that's the start of the market and as a store of value, but more and more people doing, then it expands. Like you could use the same thing. Amazon was only in books.
Yeah, right.
And one in books first. Tesla only in the Roadster before they went into everything else. And so now if you take that into altcoins, what all the other altcoins are trying to do is trying to be 10x better in something else, because they're certainly not better as a store of value or monetary. And Bitcoin is already, I would say, the king of that place. It's really early. And if there was another coin that allowed a deflationary force, right? If there was something else that was close, I think Bitcoin emerged in a part that in a spot where regulators misunderstood what it was, what it could be, and they would never make that mistake again on something else. They would try to control that network. So Bitcoin emerged, and now it's being used, and the innovation that's happening on top of it is a whole bunch of where those altcoins are playing happens on top of Bitcoin as monetary network. Is what I think happens. Not that I'm not going to say that people can't make money in some of the altcoins, but to me, it's speculation. It's buying an exploration mining company, and doing that. Whereas Bitcoin to me is not speculation at all.
Right. So I think a lot of viewers are probably saying, how is Jeff seeing Bitcoin as a better store of value, let's say compared to gold? When you look at the volatility of Bitcoin, how would you answer that question?
I would say it's going to be upwardly volatile. I would say that Amazon, which I picked early, and it had, I think it was in 2001, it was 2000, it was $115, and it dropped to $5. And if you'd held it today, if you'd held it on through that 95% drawdown and held it all the way through, to think of what you would do today.
But that's an investment, right? Not necessarily a store of value.
So yeah, but I would say this is like investing in the internet itself, which should capitalize on all of that and more value if you buy into that thesis. Again, if you try to simplify that into just this, this is more for the social. I'm a free market guy. What I care about is technology requires a digitally native currency that allows for a deflation. Every other path is peril. Not that you can't make money in other paths, not that you can't everything else, but you're sacrificing long-term for short-term. And there's a whole bunch of people caught in this noise right now that they don't realize what the long-term implications of the social unrest that's coming for that wealth is going to cost them. Mm-hmm. And so you must, not maybe, you must have a digitally native currency that allows for deflation. Of anything I've seen, Bitcoin is the only one. That means that it should perform extraordinarily over long term. But again, it's a free market. You're going to have fear, greed driving this thing, and you're going to have people leveraging it up. You're going to have China trying to ban it. You're going to have all of these consequences and way more coming through, but it's also anti-fragile in the same time. So anytime that you're seeing this, I'm buying more.
So do you see over the long run, let's define it as 10 years. Yeah. Do you see Bitcoin being a store of value and a reserve asset, or do you see it being a reserve asset and transactional to where everything is denominated in Bitcoin?
That's a great question. And I think I see both. I don't know if it's in 10 years or 15 years. I see a path to be both. So let's say today, so El Salvador is taking it into transactions, right? Which is actually the second layer, not the primary layer, but a whole bunch of people, because of the second layer, because it provides a 10x or 20x or 100x advantage over their existing system. A whole bunch of people will be long-term holders of Bitcoin out of that as well. They actually now have savings. They can hold savings. And that is bound to kind of go both ways, right? You're going to have this monetary network expanding on one side that actually is reinforcing the value of the kind of at a store of value, and vice versa, and the other way. So let's say a different country, a G7 country, wants to peg to Bitcoin, or which would be kind of a stretch right now. I can't imagine
they can't do it with the vol right now.
They can't do it. They can't do it.
Yeah, not with the vol.
So today they couldn't do it. So it's likely going to be other countries first, and G7 is going to be miss the boat as a result of that. So maybe they go into mining, maybe they go into something else, maybe they open their markets so that you have a competitive environment around this, so that they can carry on. But at some point, let's just say it became the reserve currency of the world, and every other currency could peg to it and run their own inflation rates. What you would see in the natural trend of the market is accelerating technology adoption. And then if countries were trying to drive inflation the opposite way in any country, what they would look like in what we know today's terms is it would be Greece hitting the rails over and over and over again and devaluing. And every time you go through that cycle, Bitcoin would get stronger. So at some point, how fast, depending on how fast this happens, I do see both.
So and here's where I try to think through how we get from A to B, because I see, okay, you've got this store of value or a reserve asset or speculation or whatever it is for the individual who owns it. And then you've got to where it needs to be, to where stuff needs to be denominated in the asset you're talking about, whether it's Bitcoin or gold or what have you. How do we get there as far from a standpoint of lending? Because in my mind, in order for it to be money itself or things to be denominated in Bitcoin, there needs to be a lending component to it, because people are still going to need to borrow to start a business, even if it's productive lending, like we talked about with free banking. And right now, if you ask yourself the question, what interest rate would you lend your Bitcoin for the next 10 years? It would have, or what interest rate would you pay, to borrow Bitcoin? There's no, you can't square that peg,
You're exactly
because
right.
the interest rate would have to be so negative, right?
But again, why can't you square that peg? The reason you can't square that peg is the existing system is so manipulated. It is so against the rules of a free market that would be impossible to store it. And that's why people wouldn't lend their Bitcoin today, or it would have to be a really high rate.
Right. So how do we get to, because obviously the answer is it's got to be less volatile, right? Yeah. It's got to be less volatile. But then I go back to gold and I think about that. Well, would we be able to borrow or lend gold if our stuff was denominated in dollars? And if you're a gold bull, it's pretty much the exact same thing. And the answer is no. So how do you get to that point, or how do you cross that threshold, that line in the sand where you're not, you can't really use it to borrow or lend, but yet it needs to be lent and borrowed in order to have the stuff denominated in the specific asset. You know what I mean? It's like this chicken or egg thing.
So the funny thing that you're saying is actually you're reinforcing the free market aspects of Bitcoin right now, because it's being lent right now and it's being levered up and down, and people are losing everything or winning everything and creating more volatility because of that, because of the games that are being played and it itself. So again, free market forces and in upwardly volatile with leverage, you're going to have people trading it. You're going to have fear and greed running the day. And a whole bunch of people are going to get killed and make a whole bunch of money. But as that kind of upwardly volatile to a point, it brings more and more people onto the network and makes the network less volatile the entire time. Mm-hmm. So it's actually part of what people are looking at right now. Again, that recency bias, saying that this is actually the thing that's creating it, that it's almost unstoppable.
Yeah. Okay, so one thing I'm going to get way sidetracked here, but I wanted to ask you this question. Let's go back to the 1970s really quick.
Yep.
And how do you see the 1970s inflation through your framework? Do you think that we would have had the 1970s inflation if we had better technology? Like if we had the technology today or the rate of expansion with technology, would we have had the 1970s deflation, or excuse me, inflation?
Yeah, so let's go to what might have caused that. So in the 60s, taxes were plus 90% in the US. And you had a Vietnam War and everything else, and you had a monetary policy tied to gold, and there was only upward bound. There's nothing more it could do, and France demanded the gold back. And so the U.S. went off off essentially Bretton Woods ended that day.
You're right.
And now you inflate monetary supply, and prices go up, and you pay back your debt in cheaper nominal terms, until Volcker stopped that. And so,
but if we had faster technology, though, that would have been that deflationary force.
So again, it would have taken way more easing to be able to do that, and the concentration of wealth would have been staggering amount more. Today, most of that happened so yes, there was easing and everything else, but most of that happened not in the government; it happened in the free market. You could take up interest rates to stop the inflation. How would you do that today?
Yeah, right.
Right. How would you again? This winter is coming one way or the other. You can delay it for a whole bunch of times, but either winter is coming through this because in history, this is a really recent experiment. All of this quantitative easing and everything else, and we think that it's just normal. It's not normal at all.
Yeah, and do you think we've gone from meaning the economy, has gone from needing quantitative easing to now, which is Fed produced, the Fed, that's one thing they can control is the amount of quantitative easing or tightening. Do you think we've moved and transitioned into an economy that is also just as addicted to stimulus?
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah,
100% on both. All of these tools are required now forever. Every tool that you actually make what government tool has ever been temporary? Right. So every time, again, that's why I go, the long-term theme is you're just concentrating more and more power in government, and you're removing the free market from that, and it will get worse.
Yeah. So, okay. So how do you see it playing out? I think we kind of got sidetracked from that question. That's probably the question that everyone wants to hear you answer is, do we go into a deflationary environment until they just print so much that we go into hyperinflation, or do we go into straight kind of a stagflationary environment? How do we,
I think it looks a lot like it looks right now on an escalate. So on two sides, these two forces, feedback loops, exactly opposite ways.
Okay.
So the transitionary thing that people are talking about is this inflation here to stay? The only way that inflation could be here to stay is if labor demands way higher wages, right, and can get them. Now, people saying that they can't get labor today, yes, they can get labor today. Pay them 100 times more. They can't get labor today because their economic model collapses with labor price there. That's why. And so we make the system is making this thing worse and worse and worse. And if, again, I'm not just rational actors in the economy are trying to drive prices down. And then if you zoom out of just what it looks like in the US and you look at it around the world, it looks exactly the same. Expect US at even how high the printing is. Most other economies are way worse. The miracle of China's growth is it's a 300% debt to GDP. There's no country in the world history that has ever created so much debt so fast. And that might not be the black pools of debt. That is the known number. So it might be way worse than that. So it's a giant Ponzi scheme, and you can grow really fast while you're doing that. If the day of reckoning comes and it all unwinds.
So as far as consumer price inflation, though, you see it kind of going up at the same trajectory as we've seen over the past couple of years, maybe a 5,
because it must.
but you don't see it getting higher than that.
So I think what'll happen is there's going to be so many head fakes in this. So you have the Fed and other central banks essentially trying to drive a car at 300 miles an hour through the rear view mirror.
Right.
they're bound to make mistakes, and so they can't see some of these things. So lumber prices went up 3 times, right, because of this easing. Well, now they're down 50%. So on the next rate of inflation deflation, what's it going to be? Up 3 times in their measurement or down 50%? And so unless numbers keep on printing forever, more and more and more, exponentially more against the trend, then you have to tip the other way. I was asked this question on a different podcast, but it would take a look at the supply chain balances and everything, chips, microchips, and everything else. So today's shortage and everything else, and a shortage and higher prices as a result of the same policies. So you create shortage, higher prices. If prices go too high, what do you think the market will do? A whole bunch of other companies will form up, drive prices down.
Yeah, unless the government gets involved. And see, that's why it's so tricky, because we've gone from trying to answer economic, or having to answer economic questions, to having to answer political questions, and we just don't know what the hell the politicians are going to do.
You just nailed it, and that's actually why I go back to the first principles. Where are we? What does the structure look like of these 2 markets? What will the free market do? What will technology do? Can we expect less technology in the future or more technology in the future? And where is that technology leading? Can we expect more AI in the future, more robotics, or less? If it's more, then we can expect more things to get cheaper. And we can also expect a byproduct of that in the structure of trying to stop that.
But more robotics, more AI, but then that's a question of more or less regulation, more or less taxes as well, isn't it?
So no, I think that's what's happening. It's turning into that because people are scared of their jobs. And why are they scared of their jobs? They're scared of their jobs because we're pushing up prices unnaturally and keeping them as slaves on a treadmill, and they're falling further and further behind because we're distorting base money. That's why. Not because of the free market. So people are confused, and they talk about, we got to tax those bad corporations that are making things cheaper for us.
Well, no, yeah, I wasn't arguing against the free market.
Yeah, and I'm not saying I'm not anti-regulation on everything else. So I'm not, but I would rather the conversation move to, this is a fact. It's happening. Technology has changed the rules, just like technology changed the rules for Blockbuster. What should we do about it? Rather than, put my head in the sand and say, no, it's not happening here. I know where that leads.
Yeah, my concern is that government comes in and interferes with that. And I guess it's a question of to what degree, because, if we go back to communist Russia, there's not going to be too much technological advances because the government controls everything. Now, I'm not implying that we're going to, hopefully, we won't get to that point. But you see what I'm saying? That yes, it's natural that we have these technological advances and they improve productivity, whether that's through AI or what have you. But then in my mind, I think, well, how much is the government going to interfere with that process or that trajectory up through additional regulations that would hamper that growth, or taxes?
Yeah, and again, there has to be. This is system change is hard. It's and this is a system. This is a system change, and it's a requirement that the system changes. So I just like the positive energy to go into how do you transition to this new system that's a requirement of the system. The requirement of the system is that it allows deflation, and you have a digitally native currency. That is a requirement of the system. Anything else concentrates power unilaterally as a result. I don't want my kids to live in a world that looks like a dystopian world with total state control.
Right.
And no free market. And so that's for me why I'm in Bitcoin. If people figured out what this looks like, I actually think it could look like a declaration of independence on Bitcoin. Here's what we stand for, right? Because inflation is really just a hidden tax, but it's an unfairly, it's like Robin Hood from the poor, right?
Yeah, right. Taxes everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the most regressive tax of all time.
The most regressive, but people, if you, instead of calling it inflation, if people said, if governments were forced to say, I'm trying to make your money worth less every year, so you have to work forever, people might see it for what it is. And so if you think about these two systems in entirely different type than we're used to seeing, and deflation is the natural order, and things would get cheaper and cheaper, we would save our time. We would get more for less on ever compounding path. It would just keep working that way.
Right.
We might be able to see kind of what's happening. And then if you needed taxes on top of that, if you needed then what you would do on that system is governments would compete for us by telling the truth instead of hiding it in inflation. So they would compete for taxes. And if the government said to me, listen, I don't want 95% of the people to have nothing and you to have everything, and a small group of people to have everything, here's the tax rate that I'm going to drive policy on top of this. So that then people would make rational choices against that. And I think that people would make the right choices against it. I want a firefighter in my neighborhood, and I'm happy to pay for it.
Yeah, that's interesting that governments would have to show their hand when it comes to taxes, because now that they only show you about 30% of the tax they actually charge you. Because they don't include that inflation component.
To me, it's actually what I think some of the Bitcoiners get wrong in the system too. They're measuring a system. They're so mad. If somebody tells you a lie and you know they're telling you a lie, you can't trust anything they say anymore. Right. And so now you have all these conspiracy theories everywhere. What it forces the truth right out into the open daylight, and governments are forced onto the rails of truth.
Yeah,
I think the best thing for humanity going forward.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right, buddy. I know we're past our hour.
This was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, that was a great conversation. So tell everyone what you're doing now. Where can they get your book? Do you have a website on Twitter? Where can they find you?
Best place to find me, again, the book is, I wrote it as a passion project. It's not, I'm not trying to make money out of the book, but the book's called, the Price of Tomorrow: Why Deflation is Key to an Abundant Future. Best place to follow me is at Jeff Booth on Twitter.
Awesome, Jeff. Thanks a lot for agreeing to do the interview. I'm so glad I got to meet you face to face at the Bitcoin conference. And boy, I can't wait for round 2, man. That was an awesome conversation.
Thanks, buddy.
Hi, guys. I'd like to invite each and every one of you to the next Rebel Capitalist live event. If you are a fan of the Rebel Capitalist show, I guarantee you will love the live event. The next one is Houston, where you can meet and listen to speakers, all your favorites from the Rebel Capitalist show. People such as Dr. Ron Paul, Chris Cole, Lynn Alden, Luke Gromen, just to name a few. If you want to check out the rest of the speaker list and find out how you can attend, we'll put a link in the description below, or you can just go to rebelcapitalistlive.com. This is an event where you can learn to build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks and big governments. But it's not just about building wealth. It's about increasing your freedom and networking with like-minded individuals, fellow rebel capitalists. It's an amazing event. I know you'll absolutely love it. Check out rebelcapitalistlive.com, and I will see you in Houston.